Welcome, students, to Lecture 1 of Theme Parks, Past, Present, and Future. I am your Professor Ben, and you may be wondering, why talk about theme parks? Isn't it a trivial, just a place to spend time, mindless fun? And yes, it's a fun experience to partake in, but I believe, and the thesis of this course is that theme parks are important to talk about because they are a reflection of the culture in which they are in at that time, whether it be political or sociological or societal. Sorry, I got my notes down here. Whether they be political or societal norms, it reflects the culture in which they are created in. Also, they affect culture in and of themselves. We will touch more about this in later lectures. And finally, I think really the most important reason why we need to talk about theme parks is the personal impact that theme parks play on a society. You know, you go to a theme park and you experience something with it. Every person who's ever attended or been at a theme park has experienced something, in my opinion, something great. And it's important that we talk about how they impact the individual. But first, in this introductory lecture, we're going to go over the broad history of what led up to the invention of the theme park as we know it today. And in order to have a theme park, you first need to have the concept of a park in and of itself, a public place where people can come and gather and experience nature or experience some kind of joy. And before the 14th century, there really wasn't a concept of personal property. There wasn't a need for parks because before the 14th century, they labored under the system of feudalism. Feudalism was a type of hierarchical society where you were divided into one of three different castes, so to say. You could either be the king or the royal caste, or the vassal caste, or the serf caste. The king being the ruler of what we would now consider a country. The vassals, who are directly under the king and do a lot of the actual management over time and in specific areas, and the serfs, the majority of the population, who did the actual work requested by the vassals. And the feudalistic system was very interconnected between these castes. The king received his power based off of the loyalty of the vassals. The vassals were the people who held military and what we would now consider economic power in the kingdom. And if the vassals rebelled against the king, then the king would lose his power. But if an individual vassal decided to go against a king, while the majority of their vassals stayed loyal to the king, then that vassal would lose his power. These vassals being like barons or manor lords, somebody who controlled a section of this land. And so the ability to maintain power in this feudalistic system went two ways. The vassals needed the king's support to keep their vassalship, and the king needed the vassals in order to keep their kingship. Now, where did the vassals get their power? Besides agreement with the king, they also received their power through their military strength. And that military strength was provided by the serfs under their control. The serfs, the common people, who were, your average everyday person. The serfs gave power to the vassals through their military and economic might, whether it was producing food to last during crises, or actually serving in the vassals' military strength. The serfs played a key part to upholding the vassals' power. But The vassals also provided for these serfs. They provided safety to these serfs. If they were, if a serf, a normal everyday person, were to be, walking down the road and overtaken by bandits, if the serf was able to escape, the vassal would come and try to take care of those vassals. They provided this safety for their serfs. And under this feudalistic system, it was also very self-sufficient in that the serfs were quite often left alone for long periods of time with the expectation that they would help provide for the vassals. But, they would, have their fields and farms that they would work for their vassals, that they would provide food to the noblemen, but they would also create food for themselves. There was this concept of a common area where all of these serfs would be allowed to work for their own benefit, to be able to survive on their own. These serfs could, in these common areas, which were technically under control of the vassals, they would come and sow their own seed. They would, plant their fields. They would water their goats and their sheep. They would graze their cattle. It was a common space that all people could use. But unfortunately, during the 14th century, the feudalistic system began to collapse due to a population crisis spurred on by two separate events that we have collectively called the crises of the 14th century. Between 1315 and 1317, there was a massive famine that spread through Europe. This famine led to, drought, and it caused a famine, which led to a lot of people dying of starvation. And following quickly along after this great famine, between 1348 and 1350, the Black Death swept through Europe, again, decimating the population. And so, usually when you see a social or economic system collapse, it usually collapses from the top down. There's a power vacuum, and then the whole system collapses. But interestingly, feudalism collapsed from the bottom up. See, especially hard hit during these two depopulating crises were the serf class. There was much less serfs available in Europe at that time. So the vassals started to lose power. See, the vassals' power, as I said before, was directly correlated with their military power, which was directly correlated with the amount of serfs under their control. And so these vassals began to do all that they could in order to restore power. Because if they didn't have enough power, the king could get rid of them, or what eventually happened, and quite often, was their fellow vassals would see weakness and try to increase their own power by basically spreading conflict, spreading war in between vassals in the same kingdom, eventually leading to more serf deaths and more bad things. It was a vicious cycle. But not only were they trying to spread their power through military reasons, they also tried to encourage serfs to move from other towns to their lands by giving them better deals, especially, more what we would now know as economic advantages. And this collapse of the 14th century also corresponds with this rise of the idea of mercantilism. Mercantilism is the belief that the power of a state is shown by the amount of gold and silver reserves that the nation has in their coffers. England and the Dutch and several other countries in Northern Europe were very interested in this idea of mercantilism. And eventually it spreads through the culture, through the vassals, and through even down into the serfs. So some of these serfs who were dealing with this new crisis of the 14th century and the reverberations caused by the vassals afterwards, they eventually start leaving these feudalistic systems, going into towns that were not controlled by lords and ladies and barons and stuff. And they start to look at this idea of mercantilism. They become traders, and they become a new middle class, this nouveau riche, new money that comes in. And eventually they start gaining power. Again, following this example of mercantilism, they are collecting gold, they are making money, they are making silver, and they are increasing in their power. And we see, as the years go on, there is an increasing tension between this mercantile belief system and the original feudalistic belief system. Even so, there's really a big debate in who should control the power of a centralized state. Should it be the old nobility that had held power for hundreds of years, or is it this new mercantile middle class? And we see reverberations of this struggle, especially in England, during the English Civil War, when the House of Commons, the chamber of parliament that was intended to give some power to this nouveau riche, economically advantaged middle class, basically overthrows the monarchistic, feudalistic system and leads into this more republican. There's a fight, and eventually the House of Lords, again the feudalistic portion of the Houses of Parliament, comes back. But you can see there's a massive struggle between these merchants and the royalty. The royalty believes that they have power because of the the inherency of the system, where the divine right of kings and I have the biggest military, versus the merchants and the as exemplified by the House of Commons, who say we have the power because we have the purse, we have the money. And eventually, over these years, the mercantilists win, and a power, especially by, and that's 1866 there, roughly, I didn't write the name, but that's where the English Civil War happens. And as time goes on, the merchants contain and make the power. And, and eventually we lead into a more modern capitalist system, where it isn't just about what monetary supply you have that shows your power, but you also, it starts to include the acclamation of capital in and of itself. What do you own that can be used to make more money? And under both this mercantilistic and capitalistic system, there is a huge desire for people to make more money. And the whole system begins to evolve around the concept of money and wages. Because the mercantilists and the capitalists they are advantaged by this monetary system. But the problem is, like we said before, feudalism is self-sufficient. The serfs don't need to work for money. They can work for their own good on these common lands. And so, eventually, the mercantilists and the capitalists begin to purchase lands, these common lands, and make it private property, whether it's by a vassal that is down on his luck in this new system and needs more money, or eventually, in 1773, we'll get to that in a second, the common lands start to go away. And actually, we'll get to it right now, because in 1773, the end of this common land system occurs in England with the Enclosure Act, which allows Parliament and the government of England to sell common land, whatever remaining common land there is, to private individuals. And so this completely erodes this is really the official end of this feudal system in England, because now the serfs can't work for their own survival. They must work for wages in order to purchase their own means of survival. And so now the whole system is devoted to this idea of capital and using the money, created to pay wages for people's survival. And so there's a lot less common land, if there is any common land at all. But the problem then becomes that normal people want to experience, living in nature. It's a natural human desire that people want to live in nature, or at least they want to experience it. Because as we get into the 19th and the 20th century, industrialization occurs based off of these ideas of capitalism. In order to make more money, you industrialize, so your goods that you make are cheaper, thereby making more money, which is the goal of capitalism. But with industrialization and people moving into cities and moving into, tenements as we would know today, they lose their connection to nature. And so what a lot of these new land-owning middle and upper class people do is take portions of their property and devote their purpose to the public good, that the working class, the serfs, can come in and experience nature. And this is the creation of parks. People can come in and experience nature. They're not going to be able to work on it like they would have during the common land era, but they will still be able to come and visit this land and experience some joy. Go on a picnic, go on a hike, whatever it is. The new landed people allow these people to take a portion of their property and turn them into public parks. And eventually, as we get later on, with the City Beautiful movements and people wanting that return of the romanticized, not in a romantic way, but in a literary romantic way. They want people to return to nature, and so even cities and countries begin creating parks for their citizens to come in to experience some form of nature, even if it's a manicured and curated version of nature. But they are allowed to come and visit it at some point. But like I said, moving into the second portion of this, with the rise of capitalism comes the rise of industrialization. And with the rise of industrialization comes the rise of nationalism. See, under the feudalistic system, there was not really, there wasn't really a concept of a nation state as we know it today. The people who lived in London, or the people who lived in Derry, or Birmingham, or wherever, they didn't view themselves as English, or Irish, or German, or whatever. They viewed themselves as the subjects of their feudal lord, their baron. They were a part of the county of Gloucestershire, or whatever, under the Lord of Sandwich. But as the feudalistic system collapses, there is a power vacuum that is filled by nationalized, centralized governments. And so people begin to view themselves as citizens of a nation and not citizens of a local area. And again, I've recorded this like 4 times, so I'm saying it again because I've probably talked about this before already, but under nationalism now is a much darker term because people have used this as the term has evolved into a more xenophobic concept, but at this time it was much more related to the interconnecting of individuals in their own countries. Yes, there was some xenophobia and there was some competitional aspects to it, and we'll get onto that in just a second, but especially in 1791, the idea of creating a nation of people is a new idea, and people or nations start trying to figure out ways to meld their people together into one common accord. And one way that is shown in 1791, the people of Prague get together and they create a national fair. Now you all know, and the people at the time would have been familiar with the concept of a county fair, where all the people of the county come together and you see who grew the biggest turnip or whatever. You saw the artisans of the local area came and displayed their goods. Well, Prague and eventually France in 1844 and several other places, they take this concept of a county fair and grow it to encompass the whole nation. Artisans and inventors and industrialists from all over the nation come together to show the goods that they are able to produce, to give the nation a pat on the back and say, look at how good we have done in creating our new modern civilization. And in 1844, there's a massive national fair in Paris. And even more than it being just a huge hit among the Parisians or among the French, this national fair begins to garner attention from all over the world, and especially from France's old rival, the United Kingdom. England notices how well this fair has turned out, and they begin to come up with an even grander idea. The Great Exposition of 1891. The committee, which was helmed, or at least partially, by Prince Albert, the Queen Victoria's husband. So this is going all the way to the top. They create not just a national fair, but a world's fair. They allow all nations of the world to come together in London to show their nation's progress. And in England's mind, is to show how well England is and how much better England is than their neighbors and the people of the world. But also, it helps to create a more kind of world culture besides it. And so in 1871, the Great Exposition of London is created. And I'm going to start pacing now because I like to pace. But in 1871, especially as we get to talking more about this, in 1851, the Great Exposition is held in the Crystal Palace in London. A massive engineering feat that somebody 100 years ago would never have been able to imagine something quite of that nature. Whether, it was a huge, literally steel and glass building that people in this new industrial age were actually able to put together. Again, going back to the feudalistic era, or even the early 18th century, people could not imagine something that big ever being built. But England was able to put it together, and it was a massive hit on the world stage. It showed England's power to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world was able to use their exhibits to also help create an increased public prestige for their national development. And the idea catches on. In 1889 and before, there was another one before, France holds their own World's Fair. The 1889 World's Fair, I would argue, is the most famous because of the central icon of that fair, which is the Eiffel Tower, the now modern symbol of Paris and France as a whole, is created specifically for this World's Fair. So England and France are duking it out together, and there's other World's Fairs that are being held all over the world. But one nation in the world really latches onto the idea of a World's Fair much more than their contemporaries, and that is the United States of America. See, the U.S., we've always had a big head, and, this is right around the centennial of the United States. In 1851, they're only a decade away from the Civil War, which splits the nation in two, brings it back together. But America almost feels a little disrespected on the national stage. You have eventually you have like the Spanish-American War, Mexican-American War, where America attempts to show its national prowess, but Europe and especially Europe, kind of views Americans as a second class, even though Americans believe that their technological and their economic success puts them on par with the great powers of Europe. Even in 1851, one of the most beloved exhibits at the Great Exposition was Samuel Colt, who created the first revolver. He brings some of his revolvers to the fair, and they are a huge hit amongst the people of Europe. And so that gives America a little bit of national prestige. But in celebration for the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the United States holds their first World's Fair. In 1876, and justly they put it in the city of Philadelphia, where the Declaration was signed. The 1876 Centennial Exposition is held in America, and again, it is a massive hit for the prestige of the United States. People are now able to come in from all over the world to see this young nation's economic prowess. The fact that they could go from a colony of England in 1776 to becoming an economic and technological leader in the world in 100 years is amazing. And one of the great exhibits at the 1876 World's Fair shows America's new engineering marvels, and that is the safety elevator created by Elisha Otis. I believe that was his first name. Otis, who creates and invents a elevator so that people can travel more than 3 or 4 stories into the air without worrying of an elevator falling and killing them. See, America in the 1870s, it's the beginning of the skyscraper age. People in Chicago and New York are starting to build 20, 30-story buildings, things that were not seen before. Scaling of buildings that people even 20 years ago thought would have been impossible. But the United States begins to build these massive things, and the elevator allows this to happen. And so, in combination with the elevator, it shows how America is technologically progressing. And then in 1893 and 1904, America follows it up with 2 other historic World's Fairs. 1893, the Columbian Exposition, 400 years after Columbus, quote-unquote, discovers the New World. Chicago, the second city of the United States, holds a massive World's Fair. The White City, electric lights. And we'll touch more about the importance of these World Fairs in a second, especially in relation to the 1893 fair. But in 1904, St. Louis, Chicago is often put upon little brother, also holds their own World's Fair. The largest, or technically tied for, the largest World's Fair ever held is in St. Louis in 1904, in combination with the Olympics, the first ever Olympic Games held in the United States. These 2 fairs, 1893 and 1904, are massive successes. Most of these fairs are not financial successes, but they do the job of showing culture and the technological advancement and economical advancement of the host nation. The fact that a country was able to put on such a massive display was, a thing of pride in and of itself, let alone the actual exhibits that were on display at those fairs. And so, again, why do these fairs matter? And we're going to touch more on these individual fairs in their own lectures at a later date. But why do these fairs matter? Well, one, again, we talked about it as a nationalistic, like our nation is so great, look at how great we are. But also, and especially as we get into the 20th century and their World's Fairs, the idea of a World's Fair also allows the combination and the spread of culture to a level that had never been seen before. See, in 1893, as I come down here and pull my notes out, because like I said, I've done this 3 or 4 times, I still can't remember all of the things that they did. In 1893, there was massive technological innovations that were displayed that would become important pieces of culture over the next century, whether it be the Pledge of Allegiance, how every American school kid starts their day, postcards, such delicacies as brownies, Hershey candy, peanut butter, Pabst Blue Ribbon, juicy fruit gum were originally shown at this 1893 World's Fair. Travelators, a moving sidewalk, first displayed in 1893. The third rail for electric trains, the aerosol spray can, the electric car, and probably most famously of all, George Ferris's Ferris wheel is first displayed at the 1893 World's Fair. And not only that, are these inventions that are originally shown here become important things of not just American, but world culture. There's inventions that had been made in the decades prior that were really first brought to national prominence at the 1893 World's Fair. I think most importantly of all is electric light. See, before 1893, most people had never seen an electrified city before. Maybe some folks in New York or, again, the big cities out east may have seen some form of electric light. But for the average American and even the average citizen of the world to see electric light, especially on the level of the white city, the whole city being lit up by electric light bulbs, it would have been something that staggered the imagination of those who came to visit that fair. And even more than just allowing the concept of electric light to an electrification, putting that on the minds of the world stage. Even more so, it also helped determine the way that we would use electric currents and electric systems throughout the entire world. See, in 1893 and prior to that, there was a massive debate on what system of electric systems should be used. There was Thomas Edison, the inventor of the electric light, or the modern electric light, who was a big proponent of direct current power, versus George Westinghouse, partially helped by Nikola Tesla, who were interested in alternating current. And so Westinghouse and Edison launched a huge war in order to see which of these two electric systems will run the electricity at the World's Fair, because they know that the world is going to come and see this fair. And in the end, George Westinghouse and his alternating current system ends up being the power that runs the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. And if you happen to look around now, our modern electric system is run off of alternating current. And so that was a massive win for Westinghouse and his alternating current. Helped push them to the public consciousness and allowed them to actually end up being the system that we use in the modern day. And not just electricity and all the electric gadgets that are being displayed at this fair, the kinetoscope, the earliest form of a motion picture, again, something that people maybe heard about, maybe read in the newspaper, they had never seen that before. But at the World's Fair, the first proper movie theater is displayed, allowing people to come in and see motion picture for the first time. But also, I think the second, if not the most important thing, minus electricity, that is shown at this World's Fair is Scott Joplin and his ragtime music. See, at these World's Fairs, especially 1893 and 1904, there was a divide in the exhibits. There was the official exhibits that nations would, or states or whatever, or even industry would set up, and that would be at the official, you know, park of the World's Fair. But oftentimes on the side, there's the Midway, and I really want to talk more about the Midway. We're going to touch on it briefly today, but the Midway, I think, was even more culturally impactful than the actual exhibits of the World's Fair, because while it was interesting to see, the exhibits at the actual official displays, they could interact and really get to feel what it was like to be in different cultures or experience different things at these midways. I think the most famous example in 1893 is the Hoochie Coochie, the belly dance. That was a national and international sensation, that one of these performers on the Midway became known internationally. I believe her name was Little Egypt. And she was known internationally for this dance. And it was a bit racy for the time, but still, the people flocked to see her in droves on the Midway. And if we remember really anything of these 1893-1904 World's Fairs, that is, because again, I believe she repeated the performance in 1904, but if we know anything is that Midway and the Hoochie Coochie, that was not something that was state sponsored or something that people put so much time and effort into creating. This was a woman that played what she would have probably imagined to be a small role in this World's Fair that became internationally known. And just like Little Egypt in her Hoochie Coochie dance, Scott Joplin, who you may recognize as the great performer and great auteur of ragtime music, he became nationally famous for his performances on the Midway at the 1893 Columbian Exposition. And that music, those people who came to visit him and see him perform on the Midway, took his music back to their individual places of work and places of living, and the music began to evolve. And I truly believe that every modern form of music can be directly related back to Scott Joplin, to his ragtime music. We'll touch on that more probably at a later date. But the entire musical genre of the modern culture could easily be traced back to Scott Joplin in 1893 at the Midway at the Columbian Exposition. And so, this became a center of national and international culture here at these World's Fairs, that people would come from all over the world, experience things that they had never thought that they could experience, and then they brought those experiences back to their family and friends, and they, spread a more internationalized culture. See, nowadays we have smartphones, we have the internet, where something can happen in Dubuque, and then we'll get it over here in 10 minutes if it's something massive. But at this time, even the most massive events would have taken days to reach people. And that's even news. Telegraphs existed, and they, the spread of news was much quicker, but cultural impact took much, much longer to spread from one portion of the country to the other. It was very regionalized at that time. It took massive events like the Civil War, or wars just in general, that created a more common monoculture. Baseball being a great example, starting out in New York in the 1840s, but taking into the 20 years until the Civil War, when New York soldiers brought that game down and spread it amongst both their fellow soldiers and their enemies. which allowed baseball to become the national pastime because people were able to take the game home and spread it amongst their friends and family. These World Fairs served the same purpose, that people wanted to come together and they could come and spread this international culture all over the world. But there was a large problem with the World's Fairs, and that problem was you had to be rich to attend. You see, they were long, World's Fairs. They were, several months long, but you also had to be kind of rich in order to be able to travel to a World's Fair. Say you were in Iowa as a farmer in 1893. You did not have a lot of expendable income in order to see, to travel on the train the week or so, or however long you would have been on vacation to see the World's Fair. There's some, I'm sure, that did it, but it was a very small handful. And especially as we get into this age of industrialization, where people had a lot less free time. As we get into this turn of the 20th century, we enter the progressive era where people are beginning to have some of these, free time and extra money restored through the rise of unions and stuff like that. But before that, people worked 12, 14, 16 hours, 6 days a week for barely enough to scrape by. And so a lot of people weren't able to come and visit these World Fairs. They would have wanted to. They heard all about them, but they could not gather the time nor the money in order to come and visit them. But especially because of this 1893 World's Fair, people begin to be able to. And that is through who I believe to be the grandfather of the modern amusement park, and really the father. I do that every single time. The grandfather of the theme park and the father of the amusement park, George C. Tillieu. See, George Tillieu was a local businessman at a place that you probably know, Coney Island. See, Coney Island is just off the coast of, or just along the coast of New York City. Since at least the 1870s, the most populous city in the United States. Incredibly packed, incredibly crammed, full of people who wanted, when they had a spare bit of free time, to go and enjoy it. And so about the 1850s-ish, Coney Island gets connected to the mainland. And people begin to use Coney Island as a place to come and spend a free day, go bathing in the ocean, going to the beach. They get a chance to go and do this. And there's a little bit of a tourism industry that begins to rise in Coney Island. And not just, like people renting out bathing suits or especially before Tillieu, a lot more of the blue aspects of any place that somebody would want to go to in the 1870s. But amusement rides begin to take place here at Coney Island. Actually, if I remember correctly, there was a massive observation tower that was created for the 1876 World's Fair. And they bring it to Coney Island that people could come and visit and see this massive tower, this feat of structural engineering that they never would have seen before. But not only that, roller coasters are invented there. The Flip-Flap Railway being one of, if not the first roller coaster, was created and designed and built at Coney Island. And Tillieu grew up in Coney Island, and he experienced all these things. And he took his honeymoon in 1893. He went to the Columbian Exposition, and he saw the White City, and he was left astonished, and not just at the electrical lights and all the many different inventions and things that he had seen. And in the end, he was most impressed with George Ferris's wheel. Because that thing, we think of a Ferris wheel, we think of our county fair Ferris wheels that are 2 seats wide that you kind of go up maybe 30 feet in the air and then you come back down. It's a short thing. George Ferris's wheel was absolutely massive. Probably one of, if not the largest Ferris wheels ever created. The individual cars on that Ferris wheel were something like 20 feet wide by 40 feet long. People legitimately held weddings in these cars on this Ferris wheel. It was a massive creation. And George C. Tillieu, it's funny, I just realized they both have the same name, George, but Tillieu wants to buy the Ferris wheel. And I think I mentioned it before, it gets moved to St. Louis in 1904. So obviously, he's not able to buy the Ferris wheel from the fair organizers. But you know what he does? He comes back to Coney Island, he puts up a sign, and he says, on this spot, I, George C. Tillieu, will erect the largest Ferris wheel ever seen by man. In the end, the Ferris wheel is probably only about half the size of the World's Fair Ferris wheel. The people in New York didn't know that. And he begins to make a lot of money through this. And so Tillieu gets the idea to kind of centralize all these amusement rides that he has created, centering on this ride that's a recreation of a horse race. It's basically a slide that you go down, you're riding on these mechanical horses, it's you and another person, intended mostly to be a boyfriend, girlfriend kind of thing, but you would ride down and you would experience what it was like to be in a horse race. This ride was called the Steeplechase, and George C. Tillieu in 1879 opens what he calls Steeplechase Park. And in my opinion, the first modern amusement park. See, what Tillieu did was he created almost a small-scale replica of what he experienced at the 1893 Columbian Exposition. He tried to create a more family-friendly, more exhilarating form of the World's Fair, really taking a lot of cues from the Midway itself at the Columbian Exposition. And it is a huge hit. We're going to talk, in this lecture series, we're going to talk more about the Coney Island amusement parks. But there are 3 that get created between 1879 and 1911 that really capture not just New York, but the American national imagination. And those parks being Steeplechase Park, then it's followed by Luna Park, which is really kind of the epitome of a Coney Island amusement park, followed lastly by Dreamland, a park that was so incredible at the time that they literally could name it Dreamland because it was like entering into a dream. And what was great about the Coney Island amusement parks, even more than a World's Fair, as much as I would love to go and see a world, especially travel back in time to see one of these World's Fairs. But the great thing about Coney Island was it allowed the masses to experience a little bit of the taste of going to a World's Fair. See, the people of New York could afford to spend a day to go to Coney Island. The majority of folks in New York would not have been able to get on a train and travel all the way out to St. Louis or New York or to Chicago for their World's Fairs, but they could go to their local amusement center at Coney Island and experience the world, or at least a version of the world created by George C. Tillieu and his competitors. And it was a massive hit. And not just a massive hit in New York, but also by the turn of the 20th century, New York is becoming the cultural center of America. You know, we talk a little bit about the kinetoscope, but Edison and his company begins creating their own silent movies in New York. This is, New York is relatively located close to Menlo Park, New Jersey, the center of the Edison development schemes. And so a lot of these early silent films that begin to spread across the country are found, or a lot of these early silent films are showing what it's like at Coney Island. And so, just as Tillieu, stole his idea from the World's Fair, and just as Tillieu's competitors kind of stole an idea for creating an amusement park from Tillieu, people around the country begin creating their own amusement parks. They're oftentimes called Luna Park, named after the second of the three Coney Island amusement parks. And so these Luna Parks are popping up all over the country, and this is really creating the idea of an amusement park as we know it today. And even a lot of these Luna Parks, whether if they shut down or not, they created this idea. People would, take their parks, their recreation areas, start adding rides to it, and boom, there you have it, you've got a Luna Park. And so the idea of an amusement park gets spread all over the country. And unfortunately, I would have to say the era, or the golden era, of Coney Island comes to an end in 1911, when Dreamland, the largest of the three Coney Island parks, burns to the ground. A mere 5 years-ish after it is created. Coney Island was known for having massive fires. Originally, the original Steeplechase Park burnt down, where George C. Tillieu actually ended up rebuilding it under almost a mini, Crystal Palace. He creates a smaller version of that, which houses his amusement rides, and his competitors would often say that George C. Tillieu would pray for rain so that people would come to his park instead of Luna or Dreamland, because, you're not going to stand out in the rain and do all these things, but you could come to Steeplechase Park and experience the whole thing without having to worry about getting wet. Maybe that's something Disney needs to think about. I don't know. That's not going to happen. But so these Luna Parks begin to spread all over the country, really spreading the idea of an amusement park as we know it today. I would argue that you can create a direct link between a Six Flags or a Cedar Point, especially places like Knott's Berry Farm or Hershey Park, which I believe were almost directly inspired by the Coney Island amusement parks. The amusement park would not exist without George C. Tillieu and Steeplechase Park. But as we begin to wrap up here, somebody was born in 1901 who I believe is, and you can probably guess who it is the father of the modern theme park. And we'll discuss the differences between a theme park and an amusement park. But the father of the modern theme park is born in December of 1901, and his name is Walter Elias Disney. Now, you know the story of Walt Disney. The story of Walt Disney is etched into the fabric of Americana at this point. Walt Disney was a small boy raised in Marceline, Missouri, who ended up becoming the, how's a good way to put it? The impresario, basically the linchpin for the creation of the animation industry as we know it. Walt Disney, and obviously there was animation before Walt Disney, but it was Disney and his mouse, Mickey Mouse, that kind of created the modern animation industry as we know it, especially following in 1939, the same year as the New York World's Fair. That's the New York World's Fair. That's another New York World's Fair. That's in Seattle. That's where we get the Space Needle from. 1982 is in Knoxville. I put 1896 is in Nashville. I'm a Tennessean, so I had to put those up there. But those are other World's Fairs, obviously. They're all the same color. But Walt, in 1939, creates the first animated film in Snow White. And it's a massive success. And really, it launches the Disney brand to a national level, even more than Mickey Mouse. It becomes a massive cultural phenomenon. Even so much that when they had it received a technical Oscar, and they even created their own little Oscar statue with 7 little dwarf Oscar statues along with one big one. It was incredibly popular and it was incredibly technologically important. But Walt was always thinking about the future, and he was always thinking about the advancement of technology and how to use that technology to improve basically everything. And so Walt, as the story goes, Walt would take his daughter to Griffith Park in Los Angeles, and he would watch her ride the merry-go-round there. And while he was watching her ride the merry-go-round, this is again the story that Walt tells. There's other YouTube videos you can watch that kind of show maybe a little bit different story of it. But Walt started thinking about amusement parks, and Walt started thinking about creating their own amusement park. Well, that Disney would create their own amusement park, for families, so that the family could get together and have a good time as a family. Maybe it sounds like Walt wanted to ride the carousel with his daughter, and probably wasn't allowed because it was the 40s or whatever. But there's a lot of background to Walt deciding to make an amusement park. See, again, Walt was always into technology. The Steamboat Willie, the first truly popular Mickey Mouse cartoon, was one of, if not the first, synchronized sound animations. It was a technical feat. And again, follow that up with Snow White, another technical feat, the first ever full-length animated movie. And Walt was always trying to push the boundaries of what could be done with animation. And when Walt started thinking about amusement parks, he also began to start thinking about what could push the boundaries of a theme park. Because there was a lot of people who wanted to come to the Disney studios to see how the animation was made, and also to kind of get a feeling of what it would be like to be in the stories themselves. And obviously it was hard, he couldn't get people to come in to do that. It was a working studio. But Walt also realized that was something that people wanted. And also, as these Luna parks spread around the country, originally Tilly wanted to create his park to create a more sanitized, safe space for families to come and enjoy Coney Island. But as these Luna parks begin to spread, the quality and the safety of these parks begin to go down. And so Walt wanted to kind of restore this family-friendly, safe, sanitized environment for his theme park. And combine that with his ideas of trying to almost an immersive storytelling. You get Walt Disneyland, or Disneyland, as we know it today. Because Disney, instead of focusing on individual experiences like amusement parks tend to do, Walt wanted to create an overarching story for his parks. And maybe not as overarching as there's one thing for the whole park, but if you've ever been to Disneyland or the Magic Kingdom or any other Disney park, that they are divided into sections with a common theme. And not just as a common theme, but every intricate little detail of those parks was thought about and was designed in some way to help facilitate the overall enjoyment of the park. Even down to, I believe the old story goes that the trash cans in Disneyland and Magic Kingdom are spaced so far apart that you can only take 4 or 5 steps without getting to another trash can, just so that people didn't have to carry their trash around everywhere they went or just throw it on the ground. There was always a trash can available that they could put their waste in. So Walt put so much design effort, and his Imagineers and all these other people put so much design effort into Disneyland that when it opened in 1955, it created a whole new form of an amusement park. The theme park was born. And we'll finally get into what the difference is between the theme park and an amusement park. See, a theme park, you tend to focus more on the overall experience, while an amusement park tends to focus more on individual experiences. You go to Disneyland, and as soon as you step in, even if you're walking down Main Street, USA, you are in the middle of an experience. While if you're walking down a pathway in a Six Flags, you're not really experiencing anything. You are working your way to get to the next experience. Whatever the next ride you intend to go on, that is where you're journeying to. But the overall experience of traveling around a theme park like Disneyland or Universal Studios, that had some thought put into it. Theme parks tend to be more family friendly. You know, you can go with anybody in your family age 6 to 96. Somebody will have some enjoyable, something there will be enjoyable for every part of your family. Amusement parks, while there are bits and pieces that everybody can enjoy, I really think, and again, this is all my opinion, amusement parks are intended for a specific thrill-seeking demographic, the ages 18 to 35, you know, the young people. They are intended for people who enjoy a really scary and exhilarating time. Theme parks tend to focus on a depth of experiences. You walk in down Main Street, USA, and you will be able to, you can go up to the windows there, and you will see the names of the Imagineers that helped create Disneyland. Or, you go through the queue at the Haunted Mansion. You will see little intricate details, little jokes, little things that you were really looking at, you would be able to notice during this experience. Not to say that the experience is less fun than maybe an amusement park, but you're not getting the same thrills and chills or whatever. You were looking for that deeper connection. Amusement parks tend to focus more on a breadth of experiences. And again, not to say like Disney, especially Disneyland or Magic Kingdom, don't have a breadth of experiences, but also at theme parks you have places like Animal Kingdom, which is like it's a zoo basically, but what is there, like 4 or 5 good rides at Animal Kingdom? You aren't going to go to a Six Flags where you don't at least have 30 or 40 different rides that you can go on. Again, Animal Kingdom is focused a lot on the depth of the scenery decor, but you will have so much more different experiences at an amusement park. And really kind of the summation is that theme parks are immersive. They want to put you in the center of a story. And that's why you have companies like Disney or like Universal that, they are storytelling companies at their core. That's why they're the ones making theme parks. Well, versus like a Cedar Point or Six Flags, who their expertise is in the rides themselves. And so their amusement parks are a collection of incredible experiences, but there's not really the depth of experience that you experience at a theme park. And it's not to say that there's not a lot of crossover between. It's really a spectrum between the theme park and amusement park spectrum. Like I said, I think my the examples for a theme park and amusement park are at Disneyland and the Six Flags. But you have places like Cedar Point, or again, local reference, Dollywood. Where does Dollywood fit into this dichotomy between a theme park and an amusement park? I would say it fits kind of somewhere in the middle. There is a lot of thematic elements to Dollywood, but maybe not to the same, definitely not to the same depth as a Disneyland, but it's also not like a Six Flags where, you can still enjoy walking around the park at Dollywood without going on the rides, because, they did put some thought into that, unlike a Six Flags. And that's not to say that, I would say that every theme park is an amusement park. Maybe not every amusement park is a theme park, These are really just kind of broad categories we tried to put these into. And it's not to say that any one of these is better than any other. My bias is towards theme parks. I am not a very exhilarating kind of guy. I'm not a thrill seeker like a lot of people are. But if you are a thrill seeker, you would more likely want to go to a place like Six Flags than you would want to go to Disneyland. Because at Six Flags, you can go on a crazy roller coaster that does 6 loops and makes you feel like you're dying, if you're me. Or you can go to Disneyland and ride the Alpine Slide. Whee! Slow descent down a mountain. Not to say that one is better than the other, but there is a difference between the two. And so really this, in conclusion, is the history leading up to the invention of the theme park. And over the course of this lecture series, we are going to go into more depth and detail about what it was like to visit some of these World's Fairs, to go to Disneyland in 1955, the opening of the Magic Kingdom in 1971, Coney Island. We want to go into much further depth on all of these subjects. And if you have something that you want us to talk about, please let us know in the comments below. Our TAs will be down there reading all of your comments, relaying them back to me in order to see what you all want us to talk about. And also, if there's anything that you, any questions that you have regarding this lecture, please also leave those in the comments below. We will be holding office hours later this week. I will be there to answer any questions you all might have regarding this lecture. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to continue to be invested here at Bensylvania University, please like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff, and I will see you all next time. Thank you so much.